Welcome back to the preparation for the legal aptitude sections in the law entrance examinations. By now, you already know everything you need for the right approach to the principal fact conclusion questions. All we have to do now is practice rigorously. That is what we will do in this video and the next. First, let's recap the method we learnt in the last video. What are the steps of our methodical approach to answering the principal facts conclusion questions? We need to 1. Read the principle carefully and break it down into the conditions that, if satisfied, would lead to the conclusion. 2. Figure out the relationship among the conditions and how they relate to the conclusion. 3. Apply the facts to each condition and see which conditions are satisfied and which ones are not. 4. Understand what conclusion logically follows. And 5. Read the options carefully and pick the one that is closest to the conclusion you have arrived at. You already know this method. You also learned to apply it in the last video. Now, practice it till it becomes second nature. You should practice with many questions and so often till you can see a principle and very quickly know what the conditions of that principle are and how they are related to one another. You should become so used to each step of this method that you can comfortably complete each of them under the pressure of an exam. With that in mind, let's begin our practice. Here is the principle. A proposal or offer should be made with an intention that after its valid acceptance, a legally binding promise or agreement will be created. The test for the determination of such intention is not subjective. Rather, it is objective. The intention of the parties is to be ascertained from the terms of the agreement and the surrounding circumstances under which such an agreement is entered into. As a general rule, in the case of arrangements regulating social relations, it follows as a matter of course that the parties do not intend legal consequences to follow. On the contrary, as a general rule in the case of arrangements regulating business affairs, it follows as a matter of course that the parties intend legal consequences to follow. However, the above rules are just presumptive in nature and hence can be rebutted. The facts. One morning while having breakfast, X, the father, says to Y, X's son, in a casual manner, "I shall buy you a motorbike if you get through the CLAT exam." Which of the following derivations is correct? A. X made a statement that resulted in an enforceable promise. B. X made a statement that resulted in a valid proposal. C. X made a statement that resulted in an enforceable agreement. D. X made a statement that did not result in any enforceable agreement. First step. What are the conditions that, if satisfied, would lead to a conclusion? Let's read the principle carefully. A proposal or offer should be made with an intention that after its valid acceptance, a legally binding promise or agreement will be created. Here, the word should is particularly important because it indicates that a condition is a necessary condition. In fact, it can be rewritten as, if a proposal has to be valid, there should be an intention to create a legally binding promise or agreement. So, whether there is an intention to create a legally binding promise is one switch. If the answer is no, then there is no valid proposal. An intention to create a legally binding agreement is therefore a necessary condition. We have identified one switch. Are there any more? While we don't know from this principle whether there are any other switches, we know that if there are any more switches, They are not connected in parallel with this switch. If any, they are connected in series because this switch is indispensable. We can visualize the conditions in this manner. We do not know what the other conditions are, but we know that the one condition we are aware of is a necessary condition. Now let's apply the facts. The interesting thing about this question is that the principle gives us guidance for the application of the facts. Was there an intention to create a legally binding promise? As the principle makes clear, for arrangements regulating social relations, parties do not intend legal consequences to follow. The facts show a casual conversation between father and son, which is a social relationship. And so, as a general rule, the parties did not intend to create a legally binding relationship. This means that our single switch is in the off position. And so our conclusion, since the switch is in the off position, we have to conclude that there was no proposal. Now let's read the options and pick the one that is closest to our conclusion. We have concluded that there is no valid proposal, so B is not the answer. Is there any enforceable promise? We don't know enough from the principle and the facts to conclude this. So, not A. Is there an enforceable agreement? Again, we don't know enough from the principle and the facts to conclude this. So, not C. The only option remaining is D. Our conclusion that there was no proposal is also the closest to D, that it did not result in any enforceable agreement. The answer, therefore, is D. With every such question to which you apply your mind, you are getting better and better. So let's practice some more. The principle is, acceptance of offer must be communicated by the offeree to the offerer so as to give rise to a binding obligation. The expression by the offeree to the offerer includes communication between their authorized agents. The facts are, X made an offer to buy Y's property for a stipulated price. Y accepted it and communicated this acceptance to Z, a stranger. Which of the following derivations is correct? A. Y's acceptance resulted in an agreement. B. Y's acceptance did not result in any agreement. C. Y's acceptance resulted in a contract. D. Y's acceptance resulted in a promise. Okay, let's do the steps of our method. First, read the principle. What are the conditions in the principle? The word must indicates the presence of a necessary condition. In fact, it can also be written as, for a binding obligation, it is necessary that the acceptance of the offer must be communicated by the offeree to the offerer. Therefore, whether the acceptance of the offer is communicated by the offeree to the offerer is a necessary switch. That has to be in the on position for us to conclude that there is a binding obligation. Are there any other conditions? Well, no other conditions in this principle, but there may be ones that are not mentioned. But this switch regarding the communication of the acceptance is, as we have discussed, a necessary condition. So even if there are any other conditions, they are concurrent with this condition and not alternate. That is, they are connected in a series with this switch. Now let's apply the facts. Y communicated his acceptance to Z. Z is not the offerer, so the condition is not satisfied. The switch remains in the off position. Our conclusion, that there is no binding obligation. Now let's go through the options and see which one of them is closest to our conclusion. Clearly B, Y's acceptance did not result in any agreement, is the closest to our conclusion. B is the answer. Let's look at another question. The principle, minor's agreement is void from the very beginning. It can never be validated. It cannot be enforced in the court of law. And the facts? A boy of 16 years of age, agrees to buy a camera from B, who is a girl of 21 years of age. Which of the following derivations is correct? A. There arises a contract between A and B to sell or buy the camera in question. B. There arises an enforceable agreement between A and B to sell or buy the camera in question. C. There does not arise any contract between A and B to sell or buy the camera in question. And D. There arises a voidable contract between A and B to sell or buy the camera in question. Our first step is to read the principle and identify the switches. A minor's agreement is void from the very beginning. So, if a minor enters into an agreement, that agreement is void from the very beginning. The switch is whether a minor enters into an agreement. If that condition is satisfied, then the conclusion that the agreement is void necessarily follows. So, is this condition satisfied? Let's now apply the facts to the principle. Here you need a tiny bit of knowledge from outside the question. The age of majority in India is 18, and any person who has not completed 18 years of age is a minor. You probably know this already. A 16-year-old, is a minor. Therefore, our conclusion should be that the agreement between A and B is void from the very beginning. Now let's look at the options. A, B, and D speak of a contract or an enforceable agreement or a voidable contract. They are all contrary to our conclusion, which is that the contract is void. So very clearly, they are all wrong answers. C is the closest to the conclusion we have arrived at. It should be our answer. This example was also from a real CLAT paper. See how easy it became once you went about solving it systematically? If you apply the method rigorously, even the toughest such questions become far simpler. It doesn't matter how complicated the principle is or how layered the facts are, all you need to do is keep applying the same method. The trick is to keep calm and apply the method even when you are under pressure in an exam. To do that, you need to keep practicing. On that note, here's the next question. And with that, we have come to the end of the first session of this unit. Continue learning with the next video.